dear friend or brother, Professor Marandi, is here with us. Welcome back, Professor Marandi.
Thank you very much for having me, Nima. It's always a great pleasure.
Yeah, as you see in the picture, I'm going to play a clip of Pete Hegseth, the head of Pentagon, talking about two ships being able to pass through the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes, the United States, I think this was more of a test to see if the Americans can intimidate Iran into allowing ships to pass through. And basically, what happened was that the Iranians, on the one hand, they were firing warning shots to at the U.S. ships, but at the same time, they were preventing ships from leaving the Strait of Hormuz because Iranian ships are blocked, and the United States is violating the ceasefire, and both in Lebanon and in the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf region, and in the Gulf of Oman. So the United States want to impose a siege on Iranian ports, but allow the countries that help the United States attack Iran, meaning the Emirates, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Bahrain, to be able to use their ports. And that is not acceptable for Iran. The Strait of Hormuz is not closed. Chinese ships, Russian ships, Iraqi ships, ships that are linked to countries that have not been involved in this war in any way or form, they can go through. Of course, ships that are taking goods from these five regimes, there are complications. They negotiate with the Iranians, but in any case, they're not banned. But so the Americans, what they want to do is to open the Strait of Hormuz for the ships of these regimes that are complicit in crimes against Iran, but keep it closed for the Iranians. That's basically it. And their hope was to come in and to allow two or a number of, not two, but a number of major super tankers and ships, cargo ships, the sort that we see in images, very large ships, to pass through. My understanding is that there are small ships that do pass through the Strait of Hormuz on the Omani side that are very small. So the larger ships, they have to go and they're easily detected, they're monitored. The super tankers, the large tankers, the cargo ships. But then you have a lot of these tiny ships, and they cling, and some of them cling to the shore of Oman and sometimes go by. This is my understanding. And they're not really significant ships. They're like for example, one of the ships that the United States hit last night, they didn't hit any ships that belonged to the guards. None, zero. They hit fishing boats and a small cargo ship. That is a ship and that is one of those ships, a small cargo ship which takes goods from Oman to Iran and back and forth. They struck that, and they killed civilians. So you have lots of small and tiny ships that are not consequential for global trade. They're not super tankers, or they're not huge cargo ships. So my understanding is that the United States was not able to get any super tanker or any major cargo ship through, but maybe one of these small boats that clung or to the shore of Oman, it may have passed through, but that's not abnormal. It happens. Just as I said, for example, one of the boats that the Americans struck yesterday was a very small cargo boat that was moving from Oman, if I'm not mistaken, to Iran, back and forth these two countries. So the Americans had no success in striking Iranian speedboats. They don't have any evidence of that. The footage that they show is of a boat that's taking cargo, a civilian boat, and apparently they've also struck a couple of small fishing boats that were in the sea.
It's
That's my understanding.
yeah, it seems 5 civilians were killed
That's right.
and
That's right.
not only that, we've learned yesterday that Iran struck 3 commercial vessels. Where were they? It was in the UAE, close to the ports in the UAE, or somewhere in the middle in the Persian Gulf.
Well, I think one was, I'm not quite sure, but there were three. I'm not sure if one was near Rasul Khaimeh or whether it was at near Fujairah. I'm not quite sure. I'm sorry. I'm not up to speed on details. But they did strike. 3 ships were struck, and of course, bases inside the Emirates were struck. And as we know, Fujairah was struck. The oil installation there was struck. Iran did not accept responsibility from it, the responsibility for the damage. But the Iranian statement is a bit ambiguous. So, but in any case, it blames the United States for what happened. But I'm not quite sure if they mean to say that the Americans did it or it's simply their fault that this all happened. But in any case, significant damage was done to the Emirati oil installations. 3 ships were destroyed, and the Americans won't name the 2 ships that got through because it would only be of significance if they are super tankers or if they are major cargo ships. Otherwise, if it's some small boat which has a small, which has a small amount of goods on it, then that really has no significance because, as I said, boats do cling to the shore of Oman and small boats and pass through the Strait of Hormuz.
And the other point is the Iranian attack on an American warship. Well, it was 2 ballistic missiles, from what we've learned from the media. Was that a warning sign, or they tried to strike the warship?
Yes, I think it's pretty clear that the Iranians are not using their most sophisticated weapons. They're trying to make the Americans and the Emiratis to use up their military capabilities, their air defenses. The Iranians don't want to escalate. They are very happy with the current situation. They're in control of the Strait of Hormuz. The United States has effectively shut down global trade. The United States is creating an energy crisis. Trump and Netanyahu, and the United States and the Iranians are sitting and waiting for the pressure to build on Trump and the pressure to build on the Trump regime to change their policy. So for Iran, things are very good right now. They're not interested in restarting the conflict. They're interested in seeing how things play out in the coming days.
One of the Emirati officials yesterday tweeted that the Islamic regime in Iran will regret May 4th, just as Hamas did after October 7th. That's a promise. What is the Iranian response to this sort of argument on the part of the government or these officials in the UAE?
Well, the UAE has been helping the United States throughout the aggression against Iran, and they are partners in the war, and they have the blood of thousands of Iranians on their hand. Of course, the same is true with Kuwait and Bahrain and Qatar and Saudi Arabia, but the malice of the Emirates is even greater than the others. And as we speak, they're hosting a large number of U.S. forces that have been brought to the region, ground forces that have been prepared for a potential ground operation. My understanding is that the U.S. Ground, the forces that have been brought with a lot of equipment to carry out potential strikes on Iranian or attacks on Iranian islands and the mainland, that they're mostly based in the Emirates, in Kuwait, and Bahrain. The air capabilities, and of course, are in Saudi Arabia more than in other countries, and Qatar is also playing its own. It's the Americans in Qatar are playing a role as well. So there's a large contingency. There's a large U.S. military presence in the Emirates right now, prepared for an attack on Iran. But again, as I said, Iran is not interested in escalation because it believes time is on its side. Every day that goes back, every day every day that we go forward, there's further setback for the United States because the global economy, the pressure on the global economy increases. Countries across the world want the Americans to bring an end to this. The American people, the more economic difficulties they face, they'll also be putting pressure on the government. And the calculation is that right now the high oil and energy prices, these are like a fever, but the real problem is unseen, and the global economic problems are about to become much more visible in the days ahead. Within 10 days to 30 days, or 25 days from now, 10 days to 30 days from now, we're going to see a rapid deterioration in the global economic situation.
Yesterday, we've seen that the Iranian army and IRGC together, they have published the Strait of Hormuz with the two lines to the eastern and to the western part of the strait. One of the lines, which is to the eastern part of the strait, it goes to these two ports in Fujairah and Horfakan, if I'm not mistaken, the name is that, the two important ports for the UAE to export its oil. And what is the policy of the Iran when it comes to the exports of the oil exports of the UAE? Because we know that UAE has left OPEC and OAPEC, which is a organization of Arabic and together with the GCC countries, and they wanted to sell more oil. And what is that policy? What is the understanding of the Iranian government of that?
Well, I think after yesterday, they won't be selling any oil for a while, but that's my understanding at least. But the Iranians, by publishing the areas that will be under control around the Strait of Hormuz, I think that is an intentional message to the Emirates and to countries that are cooperating with the Emirates that these two Emirati ports are under Iranian control, from afar at least. And that if ships want to come and go, especially Fujairah, which is on the outside of the Persian Gulf, that they will have to have some sort of permission from the Iranians. So this is to put extra pressure on the Emirates. Remember, the Emirates right now, not only have they been a part of this war, this ongoing war, we are at war with the United States. There was 39 days of fighting. Then after that, the United States continued with the siege, which is an active war. And we've had numerous ceasefire violations by the Americans, including this new so-called operation. And the Emirates have allowed the United States to bring large numbers of troops and equipment and air defense capabilities and other capabilities. U.S. aircraft and drones are in the Emirates. So the Emirates is basically helping wage war against the Iranian people. So when the Iranians state that the Fujairah port is within the boundary of Iran's Strait of Hormuz region that is under Iran's supervision, that I think is a clear message to the Emirates and to anyone who works with them that you cannot use that port without Iranian consent.
Pete Hegseth was asked today that in the last 24 hours, Iran has fired at the United States. Is the ceasefire over? His response was that no, the ceasefire is not over. This is a separate project. Professor Marandi, how does Iran define this current situation with the United States? Is that a pause when you look at the level of the equipment, how the fighter jets are moving in the region, refueling tankers are moving in the region? What is the understanding of Iran?
Well, the Iranians are expecting a major assault, and they've been expecting it for quite a while now. I think last week when we were speaking together at around that time, the belief was that an attack was quite possibly it would be imminent. It could be imminent, and that belief continues today. The fact that he and Trump both stress that we still have a ceasefire, I would imagine that shows that they're worried, that they're cautious, or that they still don't have everything in place yet for an assault on Iran. This particular operation was a failure, and all it did was it killed 5 innocent people, and one boat, maybe two, but maybe one boat may have, a small boat, gone through alongside the shore of Oman. But as I said, that would have nothing really to do with the U.S. ships, the naval ships, because that does happen. Small boats do cross. It's for Iran. It is the big cargo ships and the super tankers and the big tankers that are of importance. The ones that when you look at the images of the Strait of Hormuz, you see all those ships or in the Persian Gulf parked in the Persian Gulf. They are the ones that count. The little boats like the one that the Americans struck, those are, they don't have major significance they don't have any significance in global trade. But we'll see. I mean, an attack could happen tonight. It could happen tomorrow. The Iranians are on high alert, and obviously Hegseth is not going to be able to get these super tankers and major cargo ships through the Strait of Hormuz. This was a stunt, or it was a test. And I think it was probably more of a test than anything else. It was probably the United States wanting to see if the Iranians would be intimidated or not, and whether Iran would allow them to do this or not. And the Iranians basically showed very clearly that they won't. They did significant damage to shipping, to the ships. 3 ships were struck, and of course the oil installations in Fujairah were struck, and apparently bases in the Emirates were struck by drones and missiles. So this turned out to be a very costly operation for the United States. And they've been spending a lot of their anti-missile and anti-drone systems on these cheap Iranian missiles and drones, because the Iranians are not using their advanced technology against them. They're leaving that for if there's another major escalation.
Is Iran going to use some sort of preemptive attacks? Because we haven't seen that before. And the attack on the UAE and these ports in the UAE somehow reminds us maybe Iran is changing its strategy, going with some sort of preemptive attacks if it feels that the United States is going to attack Iran.
Yes, you could say that. I mean, it wouldn't be preemptive in the strict sense of the term, because the Emirates has waged war against us, and they waged 39 days of war against us, and they've been cooperating and helping the Americans to prepare for a continuation of that war. But in the sense, but taking that into account, yes, it is quite possible that this could be a sign that Iran is not going to necessarily wait for the Americans to carry out a strike, and that they will hit first. That is possible, because even though the Iranians have not openly accepted responsibility for what happened in the UAE, but in any case, the UAE was hit by drones and missiles, and very significant damage was done. And the fact that Iran has declared the scope of its authority over the Strait of Hormuz to include the entry of these ports that you mentioned, that is sending a very strong message to the Emirates, and of course, by extension, the United States. Because, Nima, again, we've gone over this many times. If there's war, Iran will obviously strike the Israeli regime very hard, and it will strike at the Americans very hard. But these countries, and the Jordanian regime as well, they are part of this war. They're not separate. They are full partners in the hostilities. They have helped kill Iranian children. They've helped kill Iranian women. They've helped murder Iranian workers. They've helped destroy Iranian oil installations or gas installations or petrochemical installations, and so they have nothing to complain about. And the Emirates is a tiny regime, so 1.2 million citizens there. They're in no position to make threats against Iran. If they were smart, they and the other four countries, they would gather together and declare to the United States that you can no longer use our land, sea, or air to attack Iran. If they did that, there would be no war, because without them, without these five countries, the United States, logistically speaking, and Jordan too, but just these five countries, let's say, without these five countries, the United States cannot logistically wage war against Iran. It's just not possible.
Looking at the region today, what is the assessment on the part of Iranians? Do they believe that the Trump administration is going to attack them, or they're feeling that something else may avoid? With the case of you've mentioned, with the case of weather, with the case of desalination plants, with the case of we've learned from the Financial Times yesterday that how the war against Iran has influenced the oil supply in the market is not even comparable to whatever has happened in the history. It's unbelievable how is influencing the situation in the Strait of Hormuz, in influencing the oil supply all over the world. And this is the problem right now. That's why Donald Trump is feeling so much pressure from this case, from the case of Iran. And what is the assessment on the part of Iranians?
Well, we all know that there is a huge detachment with regards to the oil price that we see on websites and the spot market, which is much higher. And this is all manipulation. And it's not even about oil. It's about natural gas. It's about LNG. It's about fertilizers. It's about all the petrochemical products and many of the refined products that came from the Persian Gulf. And of course, with the strike on the UAE, the market is even going to become more tight, because the limited exports that they're able to carry out, that they were able to carry out, have now ended. But then there's helium, and there are all sorts of products that are no longer existent, or will no longer be coming from the Persian Gulf region. And it's believed, as I was saying earlier, between 10 and 25 to 30 days, that the real problems, the real crisis will begin to show itself across the world, where supply chains will be disrupted, where factory production in different areas of industry will begin to be disrupted, and where fuel shortages and not just higher prices, but real shortages will begin to show themselves. And the Iranians are just waiting because the Americans have brought this upon the world, and Netanyahu and the Israeli regime have brought this upon the world, and the Iranians are sitting back. So Hegseth can have these, you know, go in front of an audience and pretend that he's carried out this huge operation, which means nothing. And as that happens, the situation only becomes worse for the United States. The UAE, its oil exports have gone down to zero, from my understanding, and 3 ships have been badly damaged. One, I think, completely destroyed. This is not good for the United States. This is not good for, and of course, Trump is going to China in less than 10 days. And the Iranian foreign minister, as you know, is on his way to Beijing. So I think that in the next few days, it's going to be very problematic for him to carry out an assault on Iran. It won't look very good. And as you alluded to earlier, a couple of moments ago, the weather is going to get much worse. After Trump returns from China in the middle of the month of May, I think he's there on the 14th and the 15th, that's when the weather in the Arabian Peninsula begins to get hot very fast. And I've spoken to a number of senior military officials, not Iranian actually, on these issues, but American, former officials, like our mutual friends who were in the military, and they acknowledge that it is going to be very difficult for ground troops to get involved, and in general for troops to be involved in war during that sort of heat. And we have to remember that both the war to expel Saddam's forces from Kuwait happened earlier on in the year during the spring weather, and also the invasion of Iraq, which came later, but still in spring when the weather was good. The weather now is getting warmer and warmer by the day, and by the time Trump returns from Beijing or from China, it is going to increase very rapidly, both the heat and the humidity. So it's not going to be a good time for the United States. And every day that goes by, every single day that goes by, the crisis intensifies. The global economic crisis intensifies. So while they're talking about their brilliant siege on Iranian ports, which we can debate and discuss how successful it is, but while they gloat about it, in reality, they're causing more harm to themselves than to Iran. And time is not on their side, and the Iranians are much more resilient, as we saw during the 39-day war. And if they were actually succeeding, if the Americans are succeeding in their siege on Iran, then there would be no need for these sort of fake operations. All Trump has to do is sit back and relax and wait for Iran to collapse, and it would be over. But obviously, these silly attempts, these silly operations, they are out of desperation. They are out of there because they know that time is not on their side.
Yesterday, Donald Trump in an interview said that he wants to arm Iranian people to do the job for the United States, because he believes that he said before that he sent a lot of weapons to Iranians, but he believes right now that those weapons didn't get inside Iran in the hands of the people in Iran. And when you remember when they attacked in the southern part of Isfahan, General Kane said each and everybody in Iran was firing at us. And what is that? What is this that Donald Trump is simply ignoring the facts of what has happened in the southern part of Isfahan?
Well, as you rightly point out, he basically was admitting that anyone and everyone who could fire something at the Americans were doing so. And so that shows, that's an admission of of where the Iranian people stand, that they stand with the Islamic Republic of Iran and with the constitution and with the armed forces and with the leader. It's clear. That's an open admission. The Western media doesn't like to uh, dwell on this because it doesn't help with their narrative, because the Western media is owned by the same people who own the government and who own the general. But on the other hand, what Trump, when he speaks about sending weapons to Iran, he's basically talking about terrorism, and that's what happened during the demonstrations that were followed subsequently by the armed insurrection that had nothing to do with the demonstrations. The demonstrations that we saw earlier on, before the war, where the Americans and the Israelis gave weapons, and many weapons were given far before. The weapons that he sent to the Kurdish terrorist groups in northern Iraq were just some of the weapons. They were the weapons that were coming in later, but a lot of weapons had already been distributed to these terror groups, which launched those assaults on police stations and military bases and slaughtered hundreds of police officers and security agents and volunteers, and of course a couple of thousand ordinary people died thanks to that armed insurrection. So basically, what Western media has been pretending was peaceful protesters was an armed insurrection. Western media knows it. Western, elites know it. They all know it. They've seen the images. Their own elites have admitted it. Trump has admitted it. Channel 14 of Israel has been explicit about it. Pompeo was open about it. We all know what happened. It was an armed insurrection, and Trump, what he's basically saying now is that we want to continue with terrorist activities in Iran and to have our terrorists kill more Iranians. Why does he want that? Because they failed. They failed on the battlefield. They failed in their war against Iran. They failed in imposing a siege on the Iranian people. It's one failure after another. They failed in the 12-day war. They failed, from beginning to end. It's all been a failure. And people see that even that armed insurrection that they had, people are much more aware of what really happened than they were a few years ago. Because we saw how they were effective during the Women Life Freedom riots that happened, and the lies that they spread about Mahsa Amini being tortured and murdered, which was all fake news. She wasn't beaten, she wasn't hurt. The images, the footage, they all showed that. She had a condition in childhood. Yes, they held her. That was unnecessary, and that's a different story. But Western Persian language media fabricated a narrative, and Western media, of course, played along with it, and they brought people to the streets. And then their terrorists did the same thing. They came out and started violence, not to the extent that we saw this time around, but still. And then back then, a lot of people across the world were more easily believed the narrative. But this time around, because after Gaza, after the genocide in Gaza, people's eyes have been opened. So a lot of people saw right through the propaganda of the riots a few months ago. The U.S. Secretary of Treasury himself openly said that we brought down the rial so that people would come to the streets. We all know that when people came to the streets, they weren't very large in number, but there was no violence, there was no arrests. And then, after a couple of days of peaceful protesters, which the governments acknowledged that they had the right to protest, and because of the fall of the rial, then these rioters and armed rioters became involved. And then we had 2 days of heavy fighting because of their armed insurrection. There was some fighting beforehand, but those 2 days were very heavy. So people saw through that, and no one believes the propaganda anymore. Just like Syria, people have woken up to the reality of what happened in Syria. They know that the resistance was right back then. A lot of people back then believed the propaganda. But now events that have taken place and the awareness that has been brought about across the world has caused, except for those who want to, insist on keeping their eyes closed, or these Salafi and Wahhabis, who right now are the only, in the Arab world, when the Iranians strike the Emirates, people on the streets and ordinary Arabs cheer on. It's only like those who are on the payroll of these dictatorships who support them, and these Wahhabis and Salafis who are on the payroll. The same people who, the same Takfiris who, helped create ISIS and Al Qaeda and all these other groups. So the Arab world does not support these regimes. The people across the world don't believe Western narratives anymore. On the battlefield, they failed, and in the siege, they failed. So, for Iran, despite the hurt, despite the suffering, because after all, they bombed pharmaceutical factories, they bombed our, hospitals and schools, they've slaughtered kids, they've done a lot of damage to homes, to apartment blocks, they've murdered many families in apartment buildings. All that aside, the hurt is there. The siege, of course, has a negative impact as well. But the Iranians know that they're winning this war.
Wall Street Journal reported that Trump appears to soften stance on Iran's missile program, because Donald Trump was asked about limiting Iran's ballistic missile program, and what he said, Donald Trump said, look, missiles are bad, but this is about that they cannot have a nuclear weapon. Are we missing something with the negotiations? Because as long as we know there is no talk about ballistic missiles, or nobody in Iran would negotiate on anything related to Iranian ballistic missile program. On the other hand, what we learned yesterday, Iranian foreign minister said that even with the case of Iranian nuclear program, it's not on the table right now for negotiations, because there are many other conditions or preconditions to be considered. You're back, Professor Marandi.
Yes, first of all, we're not dealing with sane people. We're not dealing with normal people. If Hegseth and if Trump were normal, if they were not psychopaths who were also madmen too, I would say that these are two important statements. The fact that Hegseth is saying that no, we're still in a ceasefire, and Trump is saying that missiles are not an issue. I would say that is a sign of that they are worried and they don't want to escalate. But since it is Hegseth, and since it is Trump, and since Trump is deeply influenced by, I don't think that interpretation is valid. I mean, I don't think we can invest too much in that interpretation, right? So, so ordinarily you could say that this is an interesting sign that Trump is trying to sort of gradually pull back. But it's Trump, so he may say one thing today, and then tomorrow he say, "I want all the missiles destroyed." He may, in 2 hours from now, we may get Truth Social that not only missiles, but we want all the handguns in Iran to be handed over. Who knows what he's going? The day after tomorrow, he may say, "Bueno, I want to wipe out Iranian civilization. I want to exterminate all the children in Iran." These are madmen. So, no calculations can be really made. Yes, you're right. The Iranians are not going to negotiate the nuclear program. Our negotiations are about a ceasefire and then a peace deal. Whether we get there, that's not really, that's not the issue for us. That's up to the Americans. But we're going to remain steadfast until we get what we want. And ultimately, the Americans and the biggest miscalculation of Netanyahu. I mean, opponents of Netanyahu and Trump, among the fanatics, the Zionist cult, they should be screaming that these two people and their backers have made Iran far more powerful, because today Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran will continue to control the Strait of Hormuz. And we'll see tomorrow, the day after, if hundreds of tankers pass through or not. If the hundreds pass through tomorrow, then Hegseth is right. If those hundreds of tankers and super tankers and cargo ships don't pass through, then Hegseth can, he can pretend all he wants. He's failed, and he will continue to fail. But time is not on their side. Perhaps, I mean, when we take that into account, that time is not on their side, they're losing the war. Then you could, if you view Trump as a normal person, Hegseth as a sane person, you could say, well, maybe they want to quietly back down, stressing that Trump also stressed, I think, that the ceasefire is still in place, and then saying that, well, we because before he was talking about destroying Iran's missile program. Now he's saying something different. So under normal, with a normal leader, no matter how sinister he may be, one could say that perhaps we can read something into this. But since it's Trump, I would rather not read too much into it. We'll have to wait and see.
You mentioned Iranian foreign minister going to China. What is the current, sort of communications between Iran and China, and what are the main objectives of this trip and visit on the part of Iranian foreign minister?
Well, obviously, the Iranian-Chinese relationship is quite good. I don't think there's any secret there. And his trip to China comes right before Trump's visit. I think there's obviously a clear link. Probably the two sides will be talking about Trump's trip. I would imagine that Trump has been sending messages to China about the Strait of Hormuz and the war with Iran. So we'll have to see what happens. But the relationship between the two sides is quite good. The Chinese are obviously very angry with the Americans for a host of the trade war, but also the fact that the United States has overthrown the government in Venezuela and is holding the president hostage, and now they've murdered Iranian leaders, and they're waging war against Iran, and the United States has caused this economic crisis that is disrupting global business and trade, and it's going to get much worse very fast. And in fact, again, I'm not an economist, and when I say from 10 days from now to like a month from now, it's going to get a whole lot worse. That's what economists are saying, people who I trust, and people who, some people who you also know. That's what they're saying. And that would basically mean that around the time that the Trump's trip comes to an end, about the time when he goes to Beijing, that will be around the time when the deterioration becomes much more visible in the global economy. So perhaps that would be a moment where China could put pressure on Trump to bring an end to this idiotic and criminal war. Who knows? Perhaps it could be that. But again, the Iranians are not going to compromise on sovereignty. They're not going to compromise on their nuclear program. They're not going to compromise on the axis of resistance. They're in a commanding position. So Trump is going, if there's going to be any real movement forward, then it's going to have to come from the American side, not the Iranian side. But of course, we know, and I'm pretty sure that Trump does not want to continue this war. I'm pretty sure about it. I think this whole foolish operation that we saw yesterday was like this desperate attempt to maybe have a solution so that they don't have to carry out a war. But, the same people who caused this war, as Joe Kent said, this war began because of the Zionist regime. It began because of the Zionist lobby. He said this around 2 months ago. The world hasn't changed that much. So we can assume that the Zionist lobby and the Israeli regime continue to want war. The only difference here, Nima, and I want to be cautious a bit, the only thing that could change the situation is that if the economy, the US economy, and the situation for the US government becomes so bad that they have to choose between, they're forced to choose between their own interests and the Israeli regime, only then can there be change. In other words, if the hurt is not enough, the United States will sacrifice its interest for the Israeli regime, as we've seen. Right now they're sacrificing their people, their economy, their status in the world, their global position for the Israeli regime. That's clear as day. But if it reaches a point where this becomes dangerous for the United States, then there may be a divergence. Then the United States may say, well, we have other priorities too. That is, I think, what the Iranians are looking for.
Do you see some sort of difference coming to the GCC countries with the move of the UAE? And because when it comes to Europe, you remember with the case of Ukraine, they basically were talking about that the foreign policy is defined by NATO, but that is somehow, you see what's happening right now with the case of the Middle East, and the differences are coming to the surface. What is happening in that sort in the GCC countries? Who's deciding about the policies of these states in the Persian Gulf?
Well, all of these regimes are bound to the United States. And as we speak, the United States is using their territory to prepare for an assault on Iran, a major assault. Of course, the United States has a huge shortage of ammunition. That is clear. But they have brought a lot of equipment for ground operations. But they're all in these 5 countries, and Jordan, and of course the Israeli regime. That goes without saying. So they're all in this together in that respect. But the Emirates is different from the others. As you pointed out, not only did it leave OPEC, but it also left the Organization for Arab Oil Producing Countries. Its relationship with other Arab countries is not good, as we saw the tensions with Saudi Arabia more recently. But in general, it's despised across the Arab world because it's seen as Israel. It's seen as like the junior partner of the Israeli regime. Its behavior in Somalia, its behavior in Yemen, its the support for genocide against the people of the Sudan. Their role across the Horn of Africa and across the Arabian, in the Arabian Peninsula is something which everyone is seeing, and so there's a particular hatred for the ruling family across the region and beyond because of its extremely close relationship with the Zionist regime. There are, not only do they have direct flights, not only are there large numbers of Israelis always in the Emirates, but they're also Israeli. The Mossad is there. Israeli soldiers are there. Israeli regime air defense officers are there. This is an alliance with a regime that is, that's, and even the statement that you read, where that says just like Hamas after October the 7th, that is basically they're presenting themselves as Israelis. I mean, whether all Arabs or all Muslims like Hamas or not, the way that statement is made is unacceptable, even to those who are critical of Hamas, even those who are critical of the resistance in Palestine. Because they're describing the situation from a Zionist perspective, from a Zionist worldview. I don't know if I'm putting myself. I don't know if I'm making myself clear. So to say that it's irrelevant. So many people may support Hamas. My views on Hamas. I believe that their resistance is completely legitimate. That doesn't mean that there aren't people in Hamas who've done wrong things or maybe committed crimes. That happens everywhere. Police officers in countries may commit crimes, but that doesn't mean that the police in general is something illegitimate. But in any case, some may be critical of Hamas or opponents of Hamas, but the way that they speak about October the 7th is very clear. It's very clear. They're talking from a Zionist point of view. And that just shows where the regime in the United Arab Emirates stands. It is completely isolated in that respect. It has no support or respect from the bulk of popular opinion. Only these Salafis and Wahhabis and those who are on the payroll, and many of the people who may be on the payroll of the Emirates, of Qatar, they have a large number of people on their payroll. The Saudis, they may be, supporting the Emirates right now, but public opinion